Who would want you, sick and with 2 kids? The tough businessman grinned and went to his mistress, but when he returned, he was shocked to see how his wife gracefully taught him a lesson. As it often happens in life, Jack and Kimberly met at college. Despite the fact that the young people majored in different subjects, they were still attracted to each other almost immediately, which was obvious to everyone around them. The stately and handsome Jack played on the varsity football team and was very popular among the female students. Kimberly, on the other hand, was pretty and graceful, but she chose not to flaunt her advantages. The young people first met at the university cafeteria, where Jack sat down at Kimberly's table and started talking to her, trying to impress the girl. It's hard to say what exactly attracted these 2 completely different people to each other. Jack studied economics and was a practical man who firmly believed that money could solve any problem. His parents were partially responsible for his take on life because they instilled in their son a love of money and power from an early age. And Kimberly, on the contrary, didn't feel that money was all that important in life. And being of a romantic and creative nature, she believed in completely different things. The woman grew up in a poor family. She was raised by her mother and grandmother, and thus she wasn't used to excessive and ostentatious luxury. But despite their differences, the young people felt very comfortable together, and the further their relationship went, the more talk there was about the possibility of marriage. It always came as a pleasant shock for all of their friends, since they didn't actually believe that Kimberly and Jack would be able to live together. When the young people graduated, they settled in a small rented apartment located on the outskirts of the city. Jack immediately found a job at a trading company because he was a far-sighted young man and started looking for a job even before graduating. Kimberly, on the other hand, was in no hurry to get a job and preferred to do her favorite thing, crafts made from spruce twigs, leaves, and dried flowers. Despite the fact that the girl's crafts were in great demand at online auctions and exhibitions, Jack treated her hobby with certain disdain. "Honey, you can't earn a living by doing crafts from branches and leaves," the guy kept saying. "Jack, you can't measure everything with money. After all, some things people do to be happy and not for the sake of financial well-being," objected Kimberly, who thought that working at an office was very uninteresting. In any case, Kimberly was never actually a kept woman, since there was always a high demand for her crafts, which made it possible for her to earn good money. Nevertheless, the longer the young people stayed together, the more obvious it became that they were simply too different. Jack climbed the career ladder with inviolable consistency, and Kimberly continued to do what she loved. Fortunately, the young people realized in time that they weren't a good match and didn't have children together. Their divorce was quiet and painless. Kimberly and Jack simply went their separate ways, keeping only good and kind memories of each other. At first, they still called and maintained a friendly relationship, but then gradually they lost touch. Maybe there was some resentment over the separation in the souls of the young people, but as we all know, time does heal wounds. Handsome Jack didn't stay single for long. 6 months later, he was already married to Laura, whom he loved deeply at the time. Jack and Laura lived happily for several years and had 2 beautiful sons born 1 year apart. It seemed that Jack was finally happy, but unfortunately, this wasn't the case for Laura. Meanwhile, Kimberly finally met a man who made her feel loved and desired. Kyle was a musician. He played the guitar and performed at different events. The guy was like a mirror image of Kimberly, with the only difference that his main passion was music, while Kimberly was into visual arts. The young people enjoyed each other's company and even decided to build an old trailer. They would later take it on their honeymoon trip, which would last a lifetime. Together, they enjoyed watching the sunrise over the plains in Texas and rejoiced over the warm weather in Louisiana. "You are my soulmate. You make me so happy," the woman said, hugging Kyle. Marriages are said to be made in heaven, and the union of Kyle and Kimberly was the perfect example in support of this statement. Even though the family's income was very modest, the money they earned was always enough for the young couple. When Kimberly got pregnant, the family decided to settle on one of the farms in Kansas. They sold their trailer and bought an old, cozy house. They did all the work on it on their own. They also got a dog and a cat and were ready to welcome their firstborn into the world. Little Billy was born the day before Kyle's birthday, which made him his dad's best gift ever. The kid took only the best from his parents and was very handsome. By this time, Jack had gotten very rich, but he was sick of family life and was acting out. The businessman felt that Laura spent all her time raising their sons and didn't pay much attention to her husband. "Jack, I love you, but I don't understand your constant reproaches and discontent. If there's a problem, then let's sit down and talk about it," said the woman, who valued their family above all else. As for Jack, it seemed that even the man himself didn't really know what he wanted. He often came home late from work, claiming that he had urgent matters to take care of. But in fact, Jack spent his time with his mistresses, who only cared about his generous gifts and the thickness of his wallet. One day, as Laura was doing the laundry, she noticed a trace of lipstick on the collar pull money out of the man. At some point, after yet another party that lasted until the morning, the businessman thought, maybe Kimberly was right after all, and happiness really isn't about money. I have so much of it, but am I happy? This thought didn't leave Jack's mind for several days, until he finally decided to find his first wife. Of course, the man didn't really expect that his ex-wife was waiting around for him all this time. Therefore, when the businessman contacted the detective agency and they found where Kimberly was living, he wasn't all that surprised to see that his ex-wife had a new husband and a child. Seeing Jack at the gates of their ranch, the young woman introduced the guest to Kyle and their son Billy. Then, Kimberly invited him into the house to rest from the road and have lunch. Jack was amazed looking at the unpretentious home without any of the modern technologies and other robotic benefits of civilization. Nevertheless, the family seemed quite comfortable, and the lack of expensive things didn't prevent them from enjoying life. Little Billy turned out to be a very sweet and sociable boy. He told their guest all about his interests and hobbies. During lunch, Jack felt sincere benevolence and hospitality coming from the owners of the house. They seemed to be really happy. And that's despite the fact that they live modestly and don't even have their own car. The businessman was surprised to conclude, since he was used to throwing money left and right. After lunch, Kyle and Kimberly apologized to their guests and said that they needed to visit an old neighbor who was seriously ill and was feeling lonely. That's weird. I wouldn't waste my time on some old woman. A thought ran through Jack's mind, but he didn't voice it. However, Jack's curiosity got the best of him, and he volunteered to go along with the owners of the house. Mrs. Robinson, who had recently turned 80 years old, had been bedridden for over a year. Since the old woman had a falling out with their son many years ago, there was no one else to look after her except Kyle and Kimberly. Struck by the sight of the weak woman, Jack exclaimed, "Let me take you to a good clinic, where the best specialists will look after you. Trust me, you'll get better in no time." The old woman smiled sadly in response and said, "Thank you, dear. I don't need anything. I don't have much time left. The only thing I regret is that I spent all my life chasing money and building a career. And now that I'm old, I am all alone. That's why I lost touch with my son. I was working so much that I didn't even have time to raise him. All I wish for is to talk with my son, Henry, and then I could die in peace." Hearing Mrs. Robinson's words, Jack took his cell phone out from his pocket and asked the old woman to give him her son's number. The businessman only managed to get through on the 7th try. No one picked up the phone for a while, but Jack wasn't going to give up. And when the man on the other side of the line finally answered, Jack handed the phone to the old woman. They all went outside, letting the old woman talk in peace. Mrs. Robinson talked to her son for about an hour, and when Jack came back into the room, he saw that the old woman's eyes were shining with happiness. "Thank you, son. I can see that you're a good person. Please don't make my mistakes," Mrs. Robinson whispered, dabbing her eyes with the handkerchief. The encounter with the old woman left its marks on Jack, so much so that he couldn't think about anything else. The next morning, he learned that Mrs. Robinson had died. Jack wasn't exactly a compassionate man, but he cried his eyes out at her grave. He sure didn't expect to have an epiphany at some godforsaken farm in Kansas. After the old lady's funeral, Jack said a warm goodbye to Kimberly and her family. Remembering that Kyle dreamed of buying a tractor to cultivate the fields, the businessman left the man a decent amount of money for it. Of course, Jack knew that the ambitious owner of the house would refuse such an expensive gift, so the guest left the bag of money in Billy's room. On his way home, the businessman already knew what he had to do. The first thing he did upon returning to his hometown was find Laura and ask for her forgiveness. The astonished woman stroked him on the shoulder and whispered softly, "I forgive you, dear. I forgive you, dear. Just make sure to never forget that money isn't everything. There are more important things in life, such as the love and care for your family." Needless to say, after revising his values, Jack lived his life guided by the true words spoken by his wife. After all, that's exactly what both Kimberly and Laura had been telling him for so long. Remembering the behest of the late Mrs. Robinson, Jack became an exemplary family man and took on the responsibilities of raising his 2 sons. And now, the family is expecting their 3rd child.